Greetings and salutations, and welcome to Kreeger Cast. I have my guest today, Darrell.
I'm here.
What are you here to talk about?
I'm here to talk about whatever I've been forced to talk about today.
Well, that's a great thing to talk about. So I was thinking we would talk Civil War, maybe?
Can always talk about the Civil War. You know, I talk about the Civil War quite a bit. And we just finished the Huntington Beach Civil War days, our 25th year.
Now, is that Spanish or
That's,
English?
That is a Fraser reference, and it is the American Civil War. As you know, Patrick. As you know.
I do know. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend this year's Civil War days as I was out driving home from Washington.
But you are a reenactor.
I am.
You are one of us.
I am one of you.
Yes. How do you feel about that?
That I don't do enough to support the cause.
Yeah, but like, what's your experience been with reenacting? Like, have you got much out of it?
I've gotten, I would say, the most out of spending time with the reenactors more than the actual reenactment itself. But I think that's, again, due to lack of participation on my part.
Yeah.
I've only participated in a couple battles and only maybe 5 or 6 events total, so...
Yeah, I think that's half of it is getting to, be in an organization where you have a lot of very talented, very experienced individuals, and reenacting surely has that, where you have people that are very passionate about certain subjects. You have people that are very, very knowledgeable about the Civil War or about specific topics within the Civil War. But then you can also have those moments. People talk about when you're, out on the battlefield and you have that moment out on the field where you really feel like you've traveled back in time. You never had that?
The closest I got was when we were doing the Signal Corps thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, for those of you that follow the Kreeger and I, we have a small union impression where we're the 50th New York Volunteer Engineers, and we've kind of made that our niche in reenacting, where we are the people that will build field obstacles like our Cheval de Frise.
That was a thing.
The big, it's a pole that has a bunch of stakes coming out of it, and it's primarily anti-cavalry. But just construction and the work that went into a lot of the Civil War. You have all the people that built the roads, that built the structures, that constructed bridges, constructed field works, constructed actual fortifications, and there's a lot of that. Now, there's not a lot of everyone wants to portray the Iron Brigade or the 20th Maine, the Zouaves, but we were kind of attempting to portray the regular volunteers that weren't professional soldiers, that just went out and were tasked with some of the non-combat duties. So I kind of enjoy that impression, and it's a small group that we put together, but it's been interesting, and it's been kind of rewarding to be the person that people can call for information on engineers in the Civil War. And there are certainly people that are more knowledgeable than I, but it's been interesting being the sort of the engineer aficionado in reenacting, and you've been a part of that too.
And how many people do you think reenact as the 50th engineers?
As the 50th engineers, I think
there's one other unit, correct? Or...
No, we've fielded 6. We have fielded 6, but
I wasn't talking about us personally. Are there any?
When the New York Engineers is the first New York Engineers out on the East Coast that actually has a pretty sizable group, and they have pioneers and pontoneers, the bridge builders, the pontoons.
And what's a pioneer?
Somebody that usually a pioneer is someone that has a particular skill, and if they're within the engineers, that could have been a kind of the equivalent of specialist today, in the modern military, but oftentimes pioneers were seconded. They were taken from the infantry and given the job as a pioneer. Here, you're going to help build this road, and you might be attached to a pioneer battalion. But back to the New York guys. I mean, there's a group on Facebook, Essayons, which is the phrase of the engineers. It's on your buttons. It's French for "let us try," and that is a group of engineers that talks about, reenacting Civil War engineers. And that actually, it's funny that you brought that up, because tonight I went to the airport, and I had brought my dog Antietam.
And why exactly do you bring a dog to the Sky Harbor?
Oh, Antietam likes to say hello and goodbye to people as they're at the airport, and my mom drags her along to things. And Long Beach Airport's super outdoorsy, so that, you can.
Yeah, it's not like going to LAX.
You can say goodbye at the airport. But anyway, my Antietam wasn't cooperating, and so my mother had said Antietam, and this guy whips his head around, and sure enough, he's like, Is your dog named Antietam? Because I'm a Civil War researcher, I'm a Civil War buff, super into Civil War, and my mom's like, yeah, well, go talk to Darrell. And we got to talking, and we know all the same people, and he was a member of this Essayons group. And he posted today a picture of a uniform that looks exactly like your frock coat, with the 3 yellow stripes for engineers, with the diamond for first sergeant.
I remember how that yellow was kind of a controversy amongst the locals.
Yeah, I mean, we were pioneering, as it were.
Indeed.
Portraying the engineers, and regular engineers, their color was yellow, and that, people automatically think cavalry, so that was confusing, especially because the modern engineers are red. That's their branch color. And
red during the Civil War was artillery, right?
Yeah.
And blue's infantry.
Yeah, sky blue is infantry, and orange is dragoons.
Interesting.
But that ended in the early war.
Yeah. Actually, my relative who fought during the Civil War, his father was part of the dragoons early on.
Yep.
And died of disease, apparently.
As did a lot of men in the Civil War. It's not a good idea to take 1 million men camping.
I forgot how often you say that phrase.
Yep, that is my favorite phrase.
So let's talk about this weekend. What sort of turnout did you have, both for the soldiers as well as people coming and taking a look?
Well, it was fairly cool. So we had a good turnout from both public and reenactors. About last year, it was high 90s, and even the most dedicated reenactors sometimes consider staying home when there's dangerous heat. So. But this year it was the 25th anniversary, and best numbers we've ever had. I'd say, probably nearing 20,000 public, and well over 500 reenactors.
Wow!
So it was a good turnout from everybody. We had Ken Surface, he's the professional U.S. Grant impersonator. We flew him out from Gettysburg, and he was a big part of our program. We had Robert Broski as our new Lincoln.
How's he doing?
He's great. He's I always call him our new Lincoln, but he's been our Lincoln for 3 years now. But
well, the old Lincoln really left an indelible mark on
Bill
the
Peck was a
community.
big deal.
How long did he do it for?
Nearing 30 years. So
Wow.
and he had been the Lincoln since the beginning of our reenactment. So he was a big part of that. But Broski trained under him, and Broski's been he's even been in a bunch of films, and he's kind of Hollywood Lincoln. And,
really?
He's very good with the public. He's willing to take a selfie with you. Unlike a lot of fusty reenactors like myself. But
you don't like having photos with the public?
Oh no, I like taking photos with the public, but I might not
You don't always have the time.
When I engage with people, I might not know what a selfie is. And I might not, hold the camera and press the button as if I know what I'm doing. Whereas some of the reenactors are kind of willing to break that, in order to have that connection with people. But I like to have that, first person most of the time. Unless you catch me during the event when I'm just running back and forth and then I'm on my phone and yelling at someone.
So now I have a couple questions about possible reenactor stories. Starting off with the one I think is least likely. Have you ever had a reenactor just pretend the public doesn't exist? Like, is so into character that they don't see things that are out of character?
I've heard of that happening. I've heard of that happening with reenactors in Gettysburg. But I haven't personally experienced it.
Okay. I didn't think that would actually happen. That just seems like a TV trope.
Yeah.
The other one I'm actually curious about because I remember hearing contradictory information on this. Have you had people show up as like Star Wars characters or out of time characters, steampunk?
Always. Since the beginning.
Seriously?
Since the beginning. I'd say about 10 years ago, there was a regular World War I reenactor that would always come. World War I doughboy, full kit, older guy, would always come. There is a Scottish, 1880s reenactor that is always there.
Yeah.
There's that guy with the pith helmet. There are steampunk people.
I've never seen a steampunk person.
And this time there was a steampunk person, and no matter what era they do, they kind of go with the era, but then they have their steampunk, little accoutrement, and they have their one pin from their organization that kind of, so they can recognize each other as they travel through the different eras.
There are steampunk organizations?
There are.
I thought they were just sometimes some nightclubs.
Just like companies in Civil War reenactment.
Huh.
There are steampunk groups. And then I haven't had Star Trek. But there was a Cleopatra this year.
A Cleopatra?
Yeah, that was just walking around in her Cleopatra outfit. It was very weird. And the one interesting story has to do with my mom, and this is her saving the day. There was a Master Chief with a giant American flag was about to run onto the field. And my mom grabbed him by the neck and was just like, no. And she had been following him because he was, just walking around, and then he looked like he was posturing to kind of dart onto the field, and then his friend happened to be filming it too, so no. So that almost happened. And I'd say once in 10 years do you have someone actually try to run onto the field.
So it's not a common occurrence.
No, not at all.
And after this podcast clearly goes viral, do you expect that number to go up?
No, I think most people aren't there to be disruptive. And it's very interesting to watch, so I don't see why you would want to run onto the field. Plus, most of the people, when you're on the field, you are hyper vigilant.
Yeah.
Most of the officers are there, not just directing and being in the moment. Most of the officers are just watching for safety. We're just trying to make sure nothing goes wrong. And so when we did have someone run onto the field, it was over in less than 10 seconds.
So let's pull back the veil of secrecy here. Are the battles you fight stage plays, or what? How do those work?
So it's half of a play and half of a chess game. It's semi-scripted in that we have a scenario plan that the senior officers will meet before a battle, and there will be some sort of scenario. Now, unless you're on one of the battle sites during an anniversary, you probably don't have the numbers to recreate Gettysburg. or even a small part of Gettysburg. So what we do is we come up with different scenarios, we call them. They might be, you know, the Union's on their cannons, and then we rush in our infantry, and then the Union hides their cavalry in the woods, and they pop out and ambush us. You know, it might be something like that. Whereas this year we did a little more interesting ones. We had a prisoner exchange where there were, you know, Union and Confederate prisoners were exchanged on the field, and the prisoners ran out to one side or the other, and you know, went back to their respective sides.
That's kind of a unique scenario.
Yeah, and I think that that's what we're kind of striving for, is those unique vignettes that we can show people, and it's just as much for the reenactors as it is for the public. We had a prisoner exchange. We also had a scenario where there was an ambush where the entire army had hidden in the trees. There was a scenario where we had long range fire where there was a sniper that took out their general. There was a scenario where it was kind of like Chancellorsville, where but in reverse, the Confederate army was on the field, just sort of chilling out. All of their muskets were stacked, and they were listening to the brass band play. And I had my sword stuck in the ground. My pack was off.
Sword stuck in the ground.
Had my sword stuck in the ground and had my pack off, so I looked like I was, you know, not ready to go. And the Union just streamed onto the field, you know, as if we had not placed pickets and we didn't know they were coming. And a lot of those early part of the scenarios are more scripted, but at the end of the day, it is still kind of a chess game, where if they push our left, you know, we'll have to react to that. And
so is a winner determined beforehand? Or?
Usually, there's usually a determined winner, but also there have been circumstances where, you know, you get surrounded, you're not going to win, you know, or if your men are too enthusiastic and take 90% casualties, you're not going to win. So we have had ones where the scripted outcome, along with most of the scripted scenario, has been dispensed with.
So there is some fluidity on the battlefield.
Oh, there definitely is. It's mostly that beginning part that is the most scripted.
Okay. So you
the beginning, the outcome, and you should kind of know. Most of the commanders will know the conditions of the particular battlefield. You know, don't start shooting towards the public. Don't drive the enemy into the swamp. You know, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it really is that balance between script and unscripted.
Make sure you take a lot of casualties in the shade.
Yes, there is that. There is that. I mean, people always ask, how do you know if you died? And I always say it's kind of like sportsmanship. You know, if there are 100 people that fire in front of you, one or two of you should probably fall down. And at a lot of reenactments, there will be, you know, they will cycle them through. You know, you might take a hit and then get, you know, pulled to the back, and suddenly you're mildly better, or at least you're fighting through it. And there's a whole medical staff that's part of their impression, where they'll put on bandages and stuff like that. But it's mostly, it's half directed by the officers too, where they'll be able to say, okay guys, take some hits here. You know, if you know you're losing, then you might take more hits in that particular part of the scenario.
Fair enough. So, officers. Are these real ranks, or just people that wanted to portray an officer?
There are... We have to talk about the reenactor versus the historical presenter.
Okay.
Or the living historian, as I often throw the term out.
Aren't all reenactors living historians, or no?
As the pretentious reenactor, I kind of reserve living historian for someone that is mostly doing this for an educational purpose, that is
Okay.
taking it to the next level. Someone that is a semi-professional, if not a professional. I usually use living historian for someone that is going to be going out and giving a lecture on something, or whether they're the expert on something, rather than someone that is just there as, this is their drinking club that they happen to shoot guns during the day. And there are reenactors that don't take it seriously. And so I would say a lot of a lot of reenactors are living historians, but not every reenactor is a living historian.
For example, how often do you see tennis shoes on the battlefield?
Well, that's very rare. I mean, there's there's the farbs, as we call them. Far be it from us to correct them.
Interesting.
But for the most part, people do make an effort, and even within the companies, we talked about the company. There is that pressure to correct. It is kind of a self-correcting hobby, and sometimes the company will perpetuate some farbosity. They might all get the same, terrible pants and borderline tennis shoe brogans instead of what they should be buying. But for the most part, it is mildly self-correcting.
How often have you seen Jaguar chaps?
I have not seen any Jaguar chaps, but that's what we use as the phrase when we explain why you should go with something that's common necessarily, as opposed to whether you can find a single example. So, of course, you're referencing the fact that there is a tintype of a Confederate cavalry officer that wore these jaguar skin trousers. And so we say, hey, there's a portrait of a guy with jaguar skin trousers. Does that mean we can all go out with jaguar skin trousers? No.
So how do you explain the zoo-offs?
What do you mean?
I just mean that they don't seem to be that common. Or are
No,
they?
the Zouaves are incredibly common. I mean, the Zouaves are the epitome of the French style of warfare in the 19th century. They are the uniform is designed to be more acrobatic and more more physically enabling, because that's the French theory, is that you need to be running up to the enemy. You need to fire a volley along the way, and then close the distance with the bayonet, and that's it wins battles for them. It wins wars for them. It is the reason they win at Solferino. It is the reason that they're able to be successful in South Africa, and so in North Africa, not South Africa. So when you see all these successes and people write about them, and they're in these outlandish uniforms, that was cool during the day. And when you had people in the United States suddenly forming up new regiments, what were they reading about? They were reading about French military exploits. And so a lot of those units that were forming, volunteer units, decided to be Zouaves and kind of follow that military fashion. So you go with their particular type of kepi, or the fez, or the turbaned fez. They go with the pantaloons instead of regular trousers, and they go with the Zouave style of fighting, which focuses again on the bayonet work, on borderline acrobatics, and where she'd be able to run and scale a wall as opposed to marching up to something. And so the Zouaves are outlandish to us today, but they were common, and there was definitely a purpose to it. But back to the leopard skin pants. Back to the leopard skin pants. it's one of those examples where if you can find that individual thing, yes, you found evidence for it, but was it common, and is it something that you want to portray in reenacting? Do you want to? Was it common enough that that's helping to teach someone about the 19th century?
I was trying to give you an opportunity to describe that not all outlandish things were uncommon.
No,
So,
I mean that's most of my impression is some things that I have found examples of, like for instance that most of the time I'm speaking in a British accent, and I have my Lord Rivers impression for reenacting, which is an amalgamation of a bunch of different British mercenaries that came and fought for the Confederacy and some for the Union.
I'll have some questions to ask you about your portrayal in a bit, but I want to get back to the fact that you have not answered my question about officers.
Okay, so we talked about the company.
Yes.
They're all basically individual clubs that portray a company from a regiment. So let's say we start the 50th New York Engineers, like we did. Your the group leader is usually the officer, and that's usually elected. And that, if it's a small group, should be a lieutenant. If it's over 10 or so, they usually call themselves a captain. And the second in command that helps run things is the first sergeant of the company. Oftentimes, if you're a very small organization, you will still, go very, much lower in rank. You might only have a corporal out there if you have a corporal's guard. And the different reenacting organizations have different ways of selecting the senior officers. But essentially, the company commanders might choose their battalion commander, and the battalion commanders, based on whether there's seniority in reenacting or whether their organization elects it, will end up being, the colonel or the general, depending on numbers. So most of the people that are in the senior positions have been doing it for a long time. They are experienced in both running things on the field and off the field, because again, you're taking that army camping, and you are responsible for all these reenactors out there in the modern world as well. Whether it's working with the event host for all of their needs, whether it's managing the personalities out there, because we have a lot of personalities in Civil War. But there are responsibilities on and off the field for all the officers.
Now, the generals, do they portray a specific general?
Now, again, it's back to the reenactor living historian thing, and there are generals out there that are there to portray specific generals. There's a General Lee, there's a General Grant, there's a Jeb Stuart, there's General Pickett, but they would never, deign to intervene in the reenacting scenario unless we actually wrote that in there. They're there for the living history. They're there to portray those generals, not to have to use that rank to bully the reenactor general. So the generals, the general or colonel that's commanding either side is usually himself, not a particular figure, unless you're in, again, one of the bigger events back east where if you are commanding Ewell's Corps, at that particular battle you might be that particular general, but you don't have those living historians intervening as those generals. And you can, there is a good balance. I know when our General Grant goes out there, he will talk with the leadership and say, hey, I'm not trying to come onto the field and take over everything, but I'm just gonna stand over here and maybe look through my field glasses a couple times and whittle under this tree, and if you want to send me a message or two during the battle for flavor, go ahead. and there's usually a balance struck there.
So you've brought up East Coast reenactments a couple times. Touchy subject here. How do you feel about being a West Coast reenactment group?
I think that a lot of East Coast reenactors think that there are only farbs out here. There are people that are just as dedicated to reenacting out here, and there are just as many farbs on the East Coast as there are on the West Coast. So it's reenacting always has that mix, and there are campaigner-only events. And if you really are that much of a complainer, then go to a campaigner-only event where they check your underwear. But for the most part, I'm comfortable being a West Coast reenactor. It's clear that there are people out here that have the dedication, that not only in their kit, but in their willingness to do different programs, do more interesting programs for both reenactors and public. And hopefully we're moving past that stigma. And just because we're not in close proximity to actual battlefields doesn't mean that we don't have that level of dedication to the hobby.
So, as a West Coast reenactor, how do you feel about reenacting on the actual sites of the battles?
So, most of the time, the reenactments don't actually occur on the particular battle site. Like at Gettysburg, they are on a private farm near the battlefield, so you wouldn't actually hurt the site by being on the battlefield. And there are, National Parks doesn't mind if you want to make the march from Pickett's Charge from Seminary Ridge to Cemetery Ridge, in your kit, but the actual battle usually does not occur.
So there's
on the
no
battlefield.
There
are battles that do.
There's no like putting in earthworks or anything on the battlefield.
No, there's no tearing up the actual site. So it's Civil War reenactors would be the last people that would want to do that. So no, it doesn't normally occur on the actual battlefield.
Okay. So let's talk about your impressions that you've portrayed over the years. I have a personal fondness for your first portrayal that I got to see.
Which was?
Maryland, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, one of my first Confederate impressions was the most north of the South. So that was Maryland, and of course we did our 50th New York Engineers, and we had that Union impression. But the one that I've been developing for a long time is the British mercenary impression, and it's kind of what I use to be able to talk about each of these pivotal, global military conflicts in the 19th century. So, it's just like my Lord Rivers show. This is the military equivalent of that, where I'm Lord Rivers and I'm a former British officer that went to fight for the Confederacy. And it's an amalgamation of a couple actual figures. One of them is Sir Percy Wyndham, who fought with Garibaldi and then ended up fighting in the Union Army. And then there's Henry Fielden, who was a Crimean War officer that ended up fighting in the Confederacy. And there were a lot of British professional soldiers that decided to come over with their experience and fight for one side or the other.
Were they well paid?
They were paid, just like any peacetime army. There's reductions, and when these soldiers were looking for work, there were promises in America, and there were bounties. There were signing bonuses on both sides. So you did have people coming for that, and you did have people coming for idealistic reasons as well. But that's an amalgamation of many of those figures. And so my portrayal has been in the first Italian War of Independence as a young person, a captain in the Crimean War, a major in the Indian Mutiny, a lieutenant colonel with the Italians during the Second Italian War of Independence with Garibaldi, and then in the American Civil War. And actually, in my impressions story, I leave. I don't stay to the very end with Lee. I end up leaving in like November or December 1864, and then I go on. One of my last impressions for that particular thing is the Austro-Prussian War, where I'm an Austrian officer fighting against Prussia in the War of 1866. So I get around with this impression, and I have so many little things. Each reenactor collects so many little ephemera that you have in your haversack. Whether you're a private and you might have the pipe that you have a story about, or pocket trash. You have period labels of food or tobacco. You have a newspaper. I have my my desk with my Ottoman inkwell from when I was fighting with the Ottomans in 1856. I have my captured battle standard from the from the Indian Mutiny that we shot up to look like it has been through the wars.
I want to make this clear. He didn't poke holes in it. He actually shot the thing.
Yeah, we had it's a flag of Gwalior, and it looks like it has been through the wars. So that was part of our part of the impression there, and you can see we put a lot of effort into little things like that.
I actually have a question about an Instagram post you made.
Oh no,
For Battlefield China.
Battlefield China.
Yeah, what's the story on that?
The only story with that was that in the Sutlers, and for those that don't know, the Sutlers are the people that sell stuff, and that we had Sutlers in period. There were people that had stuff to peddle to the soldiers in period, so we still called them Sutlers. And they had a teacup with a big crack in the plate, and so that's my Battlefield China, because I'm okay with bringing it out without it getting broken. And I did have China that came out and may have broken, so I didn't bring it out again. But
Fair enough.
this is my Battlefield China that I'm okay with it breaking, because it's kind of already broken.
So this is a new acquisition this year?
Yeah, this was just a new acquisition.
So this year's program went off relatively without a hitch.
Yep.
Years past have gone smoothly.
Yep.
You're expanding to other realms, but we'll talk about that. As they say, that's another show.
That is another show.
We'll talk about the Revolution. But I want to talk about your road trip, if you're okay with talking about your road trip in this episode. Maybe just a little bit. We have about 20 minutes left, so...
I have a road trip.
Yeah, you took a road trip.
I did?
Yeah, Civil War related road trip.
Oh, my Civil War road trip.
Yeah.
That was for the 150th.
Do you think that warrants its own episode?
No, it's a relatively short.
Alright, let's hear about it.
So my friend Ken Surface, he's a professional grant now. We decided we were going out for the 150th, like a lot of the reenactors did, and we drove out with all our uniforms and everything, and we had kind of set up this program. Ken was also a band leader and had organized a couple concerts to do with his group out on the East Coast, and so we played for one town's, or I helped. He played and I was introduced.
What instrument does he play?
He plays the tuba, and we have to talk about Tuba Christmas another time. But he conducted this band for a number of little programs. One of them was a Taps Memorial at Gettysburg, and one of them was a 4th of July celebration in a small town in Pennsylvania called Catasauqua. And then on the way back from the 150th festivities, we went in uniform to all of these Grant notable battlefields as Grant and Rollins, his chief of staff. That's another impression I do. And so we went to Wilderness, Spotsylvania, to City Point in Virginia, where it was Grant's headquarters during the last campaign of the Civil War, Overland Campaign. Once he got through that, it ended up at City Point for Petersburg, and then eventually we went through Tennessee, went to Chattanooga, went up to Lookout Mountain, and then we went to Vicksburg for the Battle of Vicksburg. That was one of the best preserved battlefields I've ever been to, and it was 90 degrees, and the park was closing, and you needed to park your car on the other side. They were okay with us walking back in, but the cars had to be out, so we went and parked, and then they closed the gate behind us, and we were sprinting in our Civil War uniforms to try to get to this museum before it closed, which was like, half mile back in the park. And it was the Cairo Museum, which is absolutely amazing. For those of you that don't know, the Cairo, it's spelled Cairo, but they say Cairo.
I was actually wondering about
was
that.
It's named for Cairo, Illinois, not for Cairo, Egypt.
Oh.
So the Cairo was a Union ironclad gunboat. So not a full ironclad, but it was this gunboat that ended up getting sunk by a torpedo, which we call mines now, but torpedoes. And it sank in the Mississippi, but it was raised and not fully restored, but it was raised, and you can go see it today. A lot of it has been repaired, and you can walk onto it. And
you can actually go onto it.
Yeah,
I thought it was just there for you to look at.
No, it's huge, and you can see the actual railroad ties that had been put on as the armor, and you can go into the museum where they have a lot of the stuff that was taken out of it when it was raised. A lot of the sailors' items and the bell and everything.
Was
but
there
anyway,
soft goods preserved?
I'm not sure.
Any leather or anything like that?
I'm not sure. It was a lot of glassware, a lot of stoneware, a lot of metal. But anyway, we were sprinting through this, and I ended up sliding on my heel plates because the boots often have the hobnails and the heel plates.
Yeah.
So I was sliding down this concrete as we go and try to sprint through Vicksburg. But it was a great trip, and it ended up inspiring Ken to move back to Gettysburg.
So that was what did it.
Well, it was kind of this scouting trip for him where we, he had it in his mind, and this was the feasibility study.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of always assumed that trip was a little bit.
Yeah. So it was a great trip, and there's so many things to see at certain battlefields. A lot of them are just the field, but a lot of battlefields really have been either restored to
their original condition.
Yeah, to their original condition. A lot of them are well manicured, but you can see the trench work. You can see the different trench lines and field works in Vicksburg, and it was well worth going to. Wilderness was amazing to see the thick woods on either side of the roads, and of course Gettysburg is always amazing.
How many days did you take to do this trip?
Oh, I don't remember. It was probably like 2 weeks. I think we were flying there, so it only took 3 days to get there, and I think we took our time on the way back.
And how many Cracker Barrels did you eat at?
We only went to Cracker Barrels. I'm glad you remembered that. We went from Cracker Barrel to Cracker Barrel. It was the healthiest trip of all time.
Cracker Barrels are pretty awesome.
Yes, and so is chicken and dumplings with, what would your sides be?
Ooh.
What would your Cracker Barrel side choice be? Because can you guess mine?
So typically what I do is I order the dumplings as a side. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I ask the waiter or waitress to bring me whatever is their favorite side.
Oh yeah, I forgot you do that.
Yeah.
And what do they normally bring you?
They almost always bring me, I want to think they call it something like the baked potato casserole.
Oh.
Because they think people like that.
Okay.
Or they'll bring me the quinoa kale salad
No.
because they want to see if I'll eat it.
Oh. That's so sad.
The answer is no, I won't eat that. So I've started telling them you can bring me anything you want except that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I actually don't have a favorite side other than the dumplings.
Yeah, no, I think there's apples.
Yeah.
Yeah, and macaroni and cheese. Those are mine.
Okay, I would not have picked that.
No.
No.
And then some of them have the okra, the fried okra, but not all of them.
Wait, not all of them have the okra.
Yeah, no.
Huh.
At least in my experience in my cross country Cracker Barreling.
Now, as a shout out to the Cracker Barrel Instagram team, whenever I've posted about Cracker Barrel, they're quick to both comment and like my photos. So thank you, Cracker Barrel Instagram team.
You're keeping America well fed.
Indeed. They're as cheap as McDonald's, but they're a sit-down meal.
I know.
It's really ridiculous.
Why else would you go to any other restaurant?
If you like American down-home cooking, Cracker Barrel.
And I think it wouldn't be as much of a treat if there were just no Cracker Barrel. There's just no Cracker Barrels near here.
The closest Cracker Barrel to us is like an hour and a half away.
Yeah.
It's somewhere between us and Barstow.
And it only recently came to California.
Yeah.
And then there was what's the reason there?
I don't know, but they're normally situated on highways near little areas where people have hotels. So it's a great place to eat when you're on the road because you kind of know what you can get. And they have a book lending program. Did you take advantage of their book lending program? Did you know about it?
I did not.
Do you know about it now?
I don't.
Oh, they have this audiobook lending program that I could have sworn you told me about, but let's ignore that, where they will give you an audiobook and you pay for it. But then if you go to another Cracker Barrel and drop it off, they'll give you your money back.
Weird.
Yeah, the intent is that you can travel with these books across the country.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. I've never used that.
And surprisingly, this episode is not sponsored by Cracker Barrel.
No, nor Blue Apron, nor Lisa Mattresses, or any of the others. But we just like Cracker Barrel.
Yeah.
Darrell's giving me a very strange look. I don't think he listens to as many podcasts as I do. Listeners, you know all about Blue Apron, Lisa Mattresses, Dollar Shave Club. What's the other one? There's got to be a VPN out there that's sponsoring podcasts.
Okay.
So, we have about 12 minutes of airtime left to fill, Rivers.
So now we will tell the story of...
He just looked at me and motioned with his hands.
It was very helpful.
It was. I frankly thought you would have more to say about your road trip.
No, it's... I said all we need to say about that. That's all I have to say about that.
So you can't speak on Civil War for an hour.
I can speak on Civil War. We were specifically talking about reenacting. But
True.
I want to ask a couple of questions.
Oh gosh.
So, we had you've had the introduction to Civil War reenacting.
Yes.
And you had your uniform.
Yes.
And in wearing the uniform, I think you came to some conclusions about what is comfortable and what isn't comfortable.
Oh yeah.
Right? And
wool will change your life.
Wool will change your life. I mean, a good wool coat really does do the trick.
Yeah. I was actually out at Calico this weekend with Matt.
Yeah.
And I wore a long sleeve, thick cotton shirt out, in the sun.
Yeah.
And Matt got pretty beat up by the sun. He didn't get sunburned or anything like that, but the heat pretty affected him a little bit.
Yeah.
It didn't affect me as much. long sleeve clothing actually does keep the sun off
Yeah,
as long as it can breathe.
I actually find that, like, when I'm setting up Civil War or the Revolution, I'm out there on Friday in modern clothes because I'm directing everyone, and that absolutely kills me that day. And I bet it's because I'm not completely covered. Whereas during Civil War, when I'm in my uniform, it's I'm impervious to the sun because very little of me is actually exposed to the sun. But I kind of wanted you to talk about
How awful
Have-
suspenders are?
no, having experienced, what it is to have that coat, how you kind of developed that the U coat, the Kreeger coat.
Oh gosh, my own custom coat.
Yeah, I mean, we commissioned the coat, and I had it struck up. But what inspired the Kreeger coat?
So specifically what inspired the Kreeger coat is I love the concept of a mid-length frock coat. It was the freedom of movement that is actually afforded to you by a military-style coat. You would not believe me, but a properly made Civil War styled coat offers a large range of motion.
Yeah, so instead of having it like a suit overcoat, like an East Coast suit overcoat with the big open lapels that goes down to just below your knee. It's built like a suit, and it doesn't have a lot of range. But when you have the frock coat, which is a little baggier, but still looks pretty fitted, and it's double breasted, so it goes across the chest, and it does come all the way down to below the knee. It's super comfortable.
It's a very comfortable coat. How often do you have a coat where you can get into a car with it on and still drive comfortably?
Though you should probably take off all the back buttons.
Yes, that's one of the first things I do is cut off the back buttons.
Yeah, that actually, it's for visuals here. Patrick has this double-breasted
Oh gosh,
green wool frock coat
with bright brass buttons.
with bright brass buttons and black trim on it, and it
and gold Austria knots.
yeah, it's gold Austrian knots like the Confederate officers, but it's definitely your own design. Has no historical precedent.
No,
But there are usually 6 buttons on the back side of the coat, and for if you were riding in the saddle, either those are removed or the coat gets split further up, so that those go on either side of the saddle. But if you're driving in a car, you should probably just
take
get rid
those
of those
off.
rear buttons. But it's very interesting that you're bringing back that frock coat, and that you actually got some use out of it.
Yeah, I actually wear my green frock coat when I'm out on my property in Washington. I ordered this thing thinking, this is great. And I've worn it on a few walks here in Huntington Beach and quickly learned, no, this is not great. So I'm switching to a much more modest design. We're going with a pure black coat with dark bronze buttons. No knots on it, except for I think a little trim around the cuff.
Yeah, those black knots.
Yeah, a little, just to give it a little texture there.
A little militaresque.
Yeah,
And it's I mean, you get some weird looks here and there, but you are wearing a frock coat. I mean, people get weird looks when they wear any sort of long coat out in California, though.
this is true. But remember, through high school, I wore that semi-replica World War I coat
Oh yeah,
that I just adored.
yeah.
I think it was Macy's did a World War I themed line of clothing,
Classy.
and that was my favorite coat to this day.
So California, you're supposed to wear shorts and UGG boots.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I'll talk to you all about a practical UGG boot in a future episode.
I'm sure you will, Patrick.
Yeah. I found
Sure
this
you will.
I found this Tasmanian company that produces a similar to UGG work boot.
Van Diemen's Land.
They make it with a steel toe.
All right.
Yeah. So that's not exactly Civil War related. So yes, I have my own custom coat. We'll see how that goes. Haven't received the black one yet, but we know it's on its way.
We do.
That's an entirely another show too.
That's an entirely different show.
So we'll be talking about that in the future. Is there anything else you have to say on reenacting for tonight?
I don't have anything else to say about reenacting tonight. Just that, if there are events in your area, everyone always thinks that reenacting's hard to get into. People have a lot of units have extra gear, or they can at least point you in the right direction.
If you listen and are respectful, they'll help you.
Yeah, and each reenactment unit, each company has its own culture. There's each artillery battery has its own culture. There are units that are super old, units that are super young, and units that are very, very, campaigner heavy, where there's no tents. Everything has to be absolutely period conversations. Very intense, and a lot of people, that's not their style.
So you're saying the phrase campaigner, not complainer.
Oh, Patrick.
I misheard you the first time.
Okay.
So...
I thought that was a pun or something.
No, the only pun I've desperately wanted to use this entire show, I've still yet to use.
Ah.
Yeah.
Lest you be put in the penitentiary.
Ooh.
As a punishment.
I wanted to talk about how, we didn't take our grant for granted before we left.
Wow.
So.
And on that note.
I think we're going to cut this episode the tiniest bit short. So thank you very much, Darrell, for joining me.
A pleasure, as always.
We will join you again in a week. Have a nice night.